Dear students, dear colleagues, dear participants of the Ananievsky Чтение conference, I would like to introduce you to the world-famous scientist, economic psychologist from University of Vienna, Austria, Professor Erich Kirchler. We have long-term good relationship, and I look forward to further cooperation. In the plenary session, he talked about tax behavior, trust and power. Today, he kindly agreed to give a popular science lecture about decision under uncertainty. Dear Professor Erich, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Olga, and good evening to all of you. I feel really honored to be with you today, and I was briefed actually to talk about a more general topic than our usual research, which is tax behavior or tax psychology, a rather exotic field in psychology. I was told to be more general, and I thought that perhaps if you're students, you might be interested in decision making, especially in decisions under uncertainty, and some behavioral insights which we gained in economic psychology or in social psychology, but also in behavioral economics. And if you're interested in more, we wrote a book in 2018, which is more or less a textbook on the state of the art in economic psychology.
Erich, your sound is missing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I switched on the micro, but I was then muted
Erich.
again. Yeah? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay now.
All right. So I don't know what you have understood so far, but I just wanted to say that it's an honor to talk to you. And since I was briefed that the audience is a rather broad one, coming from different disciplines in psychology, I thought that perhaps the topic which we are investigating in our research is too narrow, namely tax behavior. And I chose a topic which relates to all different fields of psychology, but also to other disciplines, which is decision-making. Decision-making, especially under uncertainty. Decision-making when you don't know for sure what the outcome will be if you choose a certain option. You have probably some probabilities of consequences which might happen. Sometimes you don't even know exactly about the probabilities. And if you look at what was going on at the beginning of the pandemic, people, especially politicians, but also experts, had to take decisions under nescience. They didn't know anything. So that was really a difficult situation to take decisions. What I also wanted to say is that you can interrupt me anytime. If your questions, just post them. I hope that will be possible. And if you want to know more and to know where I took the information for today's presentation, then I should say it's from our textbook on economic psychology, an introduction which was published by Cambridge University Press in 2018. Now, when we take decisions, and we very frequently take decisions, we usually distinguish between decisions under certainty. When you think about decisions under certainty, you consider decisions where you know exactly what you get when you choose one out of a set of options. So if you choose A, B, or C, you know exactly what you get, what it is. Usually when you choose to buy bread, a certain kind of, you get it, and that's for sure, and you leave. Then we have the majority of decisions which are taken under uncertainty, where you have probably not more knowledge about the consequences, but that they occur with a certain likelihood, with a certain probability. In that case, we talk about decisions under risk. And sometimes you don't even know the probabilities that something happens when you choose one out of several options. In that case, we talk about decisions under uncertainty, or better, under ambiguity. And in some cases, as I said before, we take decisions under nescience. We don't know what the consequences are. We don't know, for example, whether specific measures against the pandemic, to fight the pandemic, will be successful or not. Now, my focus is predominantly on decisions under uncertainty, namely risky and ambiguous decisions. And I am usually studying decisions in the financial field, when you take financial decisions, decisions about money. And I think the knowledge which psychology has accumulated in this field is quite useful, especially to people who are in the consulting. When you think, for example, to a bank, you usually find somebody who consults the customer. A customer has perhaps saved some money or takes a credit, has a certain concern, a certain problem, and goes to get advice from a consultant in the bank. And if you look at this interaction, this partnership between client and consultant, then you might tell the consultant that it is important that he or she knows about the goals which a client has. What does he or she want to do with the money, with the credit or the debts which she or him has? It's good to know about the client's knowledge, because if you talk to somebody, if you interact with somebody, you want to be understood. So you have to look for the language such that the other can understand. There's often no value to use technical terms which are very familiar in your field, but the client has no clue what they are about. It's also important to know about the time horizon of a decision. We all know that it's a lot of fun to take a decision for a good, which you get in the moment, at present. But it's really hard to take a decision for something which is positive, but you get it in the future, in the long term. On the other hand, we all know that if you take a decision against a pain, a bad, then you again consider this outcome, this negative outcome, very intensively if it's happening at present. But if it's in the long term, in the future, then you discount the harm, the negativity of the event. So knowing about motives, knowledge, and time horizon is important. But on the other hand, the consultant usually has also goals. Has to pursue the goals of the organization, of the bank in that case. He or she has to know how to communicate with people. And sometimes it's good to know about negotiation strategies, or in other words, about persuasion strategies. And perhaps it's important also to know about decision architecture. So the topics which I'm usually dealing with when I talk to my students or to colleagues in the practical fields are motives, which can be rational, investing money somewhere to at least save the value, or there are certain aspirations, emotions which are involved. People usually are very greedy or anxious. They fear to lose money, or they anticipate the regret of having done something with a negative consequence in the future. So this is probably all important to consider in decisions which are uncertain in the financial sector. it's good to know about financial literacy of the client, of the customer, about financial profiling and trust and all these issues, and the time horizon. As I said before, the time horizon, considering whether something happens in the present or in future. On the side of the consultant, it's important to know about the motives, the goals of the organization, and the goals of the client. And usually the consultant is in a sandwich position where he or she has to pursue both goals and balance out. That's not always an easy task. On the level of communication, we know that if you want to persuade somebody to buy something, if you want to convince somebody to yield to your point of view, etc., the best is to know a lot about an issue. Expertise is very persuasive. And if you have something which is really qualitatively high, it's easier to sell the product than if the quality is not so perfect. But besides these two really, let's call it selling criteria, knowledge, expertise, and quality, besides that, there are a lot of persuasion issues which count, as, for example, sympathy, status of the consultant or the seller, the negotiator, reciprocity norms, social norms, commitment, scarcity, all that counts, and we know that. And we know that especially from persuasion psychology. But there is also prospect theory, which teaches us that gains and losses have different weights. Losses loom much higher than gains. So depending on how you frame a situation as a loss, as a gain, or as a foregone loss, people react differently and might decide and behave differently. So, and besides all that, the situation counts. How is the situation in which you negotiate, talk, persuade, or just advise somebody? It's the nudging industry, which is important and which has a certain effect, as we know from behavioral economics. So usually I'm talking about all that, and today I would like to talk about starting the benchmark, so to say, about utility maximization and rationality, then go on talking about decisions under uncertainty. And I would like then to stress most heavily the fragility of economic assumptions in decision-making, namely talking about anomalies, which are very normal, subjective perception, errors, biases, but also heuristics and loss aversion and prospect theory. And if time permits, I will also talk about decision architecture, hoping that I will tell you something new and not just refresh what you already know. Now, when talking about rational decision-making, we usually assume, and the majority of the models in economics, but also in law and in political decision-making, in the political arena, the majority of models assume that we are rational decision makers, at least trying to maximize our utility. But that would mean that when we take a decision, we start to identify the problem which we have. What is the task? What is the problem? If you need a new car because the old one is broken, you know you have a problem, you have to get a new car. So you identify your problem, you think about what you really need, how the car should be, which fulfills your desires, your wishes, and you weight all these criteria. There might be some criteria which are very important, like for example the price, and other criteria which might be of less importance, perhaps the color of the car. You look for alternatives on the market. You go and get information about the different cars on the market. You collect a set of alternatives, of options, and you judge them. You evaluate the criteria, the attributes of these alternatives, and select the best one, the one which fits your decision criteria. You select it, you buy it, you choose, you make the decision, and then you look back at the decision process, and you might be satisfied that at the end you found the best alternative, which is great. So in other words, we assume in rational decision-making models that people are driven by utility maximization desires. We want to get the best out of the situation. And we are very logical. We are very rational in our decision-making processes. We are rational, which means that we fulfill certain axioms, certain basic assumptions. And if we do that, then really Homo economicus, the rational model, would fit pretty well our behavior. So there are some assumptions which are basic, like you have a complete overview of the alternatives, which are at your disposition, transitivity, reflexivity, etc. This is essential, and we can talk about rational decision making. And let me make a few trials with you. I have prepared some tasks here. If you are willing, make these tasks with me. I see whether I can. No, I can't see you in the chat room. But just try. If you go and buy something, and you buy a product which costs 5, and a second product which costs 10, and then you put in your basket another product which costs 20, and then you go to the cashier in the supermarket, how much do you have to pay? How many rubles do you have to pay? In that case, it would be 5, 10, and 20, 35. The answer comes very spontaneously. If I ask you to multiply 10 by 10, you probably have no problem, but you have the answer immediately, right? And if I ask you, a bat and a ball together cost 110, and the bat costs 100, what does the ball then cost? What is the answer? 10, right? So that's not difficult. I guess everybody in the group has solved this task very easily. And that makes me come to the conclusion that we are really great. We are great. And sometimes it's not only that we are great in doing things, but our brain allows us with our willpower to change the world. It's the willpower to change. I don't know, perhaps you know this small movie, but there is a train going into a tunnel or coming out of a tunnel. I let it go if it's working. And then you just think that the train goes to the right. And when it does this, you think that it comes out of the tunnel, it goes to the left. Let me see whether that's working. Was it possible to let the train go in the direction in the tunnel or out of the tunnel? Olga, did it work? Yeah? All right. So we are great, but that's not the end of the story. Unfortunately, there's psychology, which teaches us that we are, not so great as we assume when we start thinking that we are rational human utility maximizers. So psychology teaches us, no, there are some weaknesses. There are some shortcomings which make it sometimes difficult to find the best solution. And let me see whether that's true. I give you another example. Think about that. 5 days, a 5 days wellness holiday for 2 people with a massage for each one costs $900 or whatever currency you like. The holiday without massage costs $700 more than the massages. How much cost the massages? I guess the majority of people would think 200, like before. But the holiday without massage costs 700 more than the massage. So the answer can only be the holidays cost 800 and the massage 100. That's a sum of 900 and the difference is 700. That's not so easy. That's not so intuitive. Now you need system 2, the analytical system, to get through this problem. While in the former examples, we just intuitively, spontaneously, by using system 1, the old holistic, intuitive system of thinking, by using that, we came up with a correct answer. Now, if we did it here as well, the answer would be 200, which is wrong. And as soon as we start thinking, we get slow, it's hard, it costs energy, but we find probably the right solution. So when we take decisions, we have to distinguish between situations in which we use our old intuitive gut feeling system, or whether we think analytically and use system 2. In both cases, we can make errors. We can observe biases on the market. We can see anomalies which are very normal. Now let me talk a little bit about anomalies, about mistakes which we make in decision-making processes. The first approach, which I usually choose, is the one where I look at the perception. How do we perceive the reality? Do we perceive the reality as it is? Or are we victims? Are we falling prey to illusions? Sometimes we do fall to victim to illusions. We use stereotypes. We use self-fulfilling prophecy. And we betray ourselves by doing that. You probably know this illusion, the Miller-Lure optical illusion, where you have 2 lines which are equal in length. And I don't change the length at all, but I change something in the surrounding, in the context. And if you want or not, you see now the length different. The upper line is longer than the lower line. You know this optical illusion, which shows that the environment has an influence on the perception of the inner circle. It becomes big and small. No, it remains always the same. It's just that the environment, the context changes. The same is here. This square, this rectangle is equal with regard to the gray, but the context is different. The background is different, and therefore it appears lighter on the left side than on the right side. We have these illusions here. How many planks do you see? How many planks are you counting in this case? Is it 3 or 4? When I give talks to the tax administration, I usually use this, and I say, I as a taxpayer pay for 3. And you, as the auditor, the official, tax official, make me pay taxes as if I had 4 blanks. So there are some asymmetries, some differences which play a role. Now let me make a short excursion. These are optical illusions. Fine, they are funny. At least to students, usually optical illusions are something which is fascinating. But you can also use these optical illusions, so to say, in the nudging, in the choice architecture, in the design of something, of a decision situation, where you want people to do something. If you want your friends to slow down when they come into your house, be sure that the tiles have this decoration. Of course, this corridor is flat, no, but the illusion makes them slow down. This is, I think, a nice illustration of nudging, of how you can manipulate or guide people's behavior. Another example is this one. The stripes on the street for passengers to cross are usually just white stripes. If you paint it like this, you will see that you don't have to tell car drivers to slow down. They will do it themselves without being asked. So let's go back. Let's go back now to some anomalies, to some difficulties in decision making, in perceiving the whole information. Do you know this exercise? In this exercise, I give you a text, finished files are, etc., etc. And your task is now to count the F's in the text. How many F's do you count? Of course, there's finished, there's 1 F. But how many are there overall? Well, in my class, Olga says 5. Daria, Gordana, Sati, Elena. How many do you see? Well, people usually come up with 3 to 6. Now, what is the right answer? It's not a very difficult task. Who says 3? Who says 6? How many are there? Finished files are the result of years of scientific, and then there's another of. There are 6. Usually people don't perceive the information which is not important. The offs are left out. Off is not counted. And therefore they come up with 3. And even if you tell them, they have a hard time to see it. Once they see it forever. So our attention spotlight is a very narrow one. We look at specific information which is important for us at the moment. It's important for what we have in mind, but sometimes we just don't perceive other information which might be, however, relevant in our decision with regard to the consequences of our decisions. And sometimes it's not us who have half of the information, but it's the sender, the media, the politicians who give us some specific selected information which lead us to a certain belief which might be wrong. Let me ask here, what do you see? You see a TV and you see 2 people fighting. Who is the aggressor on this picture? The guy on the right side or the guy on the left side? Well, you would say the guy on the left side, of course. But look, the whole picture is like that. And you see immediately you were wrong. The media gave you the wrong, no, gave you only part, not the wrong, but only part of the information, which misled you in your decision, in your evaluation process. So perceiving information, selective attention are issues which are important in decision making to consider. But besides that, people have difficulties to do some calculations. For example, exponential growth. If I asked you to tell me how often I have to fold a sheet of paper, which has 0.1 millimeters in thickness, how often do I have to fold this very thin paper, or to cut it in two and to put one piece over the other? How often do I have to do it to reach a length of 100 meters? People usually exaggerate dramatically when they give their estimations, but it's only 21 times. So if you had a sheet of paper which is big enough to be folded and folded and folded, if you do it 21 times, it's 100 meters high, and that's difficult to understand. Well, recently we have, with coronavirus, a good example which shows us how difficult it is to perceive exponential growth. Exponential growth as a very difficult to observe phenomenon at the beginning of the development. And one of a sudden, the whole process starts to get out of control. We have different other problems. One is with compound probabilities. And you perhaps know this Monty-Hall dilemma. The Monty-Hall dilemma, which is a nice example in the classroom, actually, where you ask people, well, you invite them, let's say, to a TV show. In a TV show, they can earn a lot of money. They can get $1 million if they respond to all questions correctly. So let's assume that you succeeded in responding to all questions correctly. You are very close to getting the prize of $1 million, but you have still an obstacle to cope with. The TV show is made such that before getting the million, you have to take 1 out of 3 envelopes. In 2 envelopes, there is nothing. You don't get anything. In 1 envelope, it says you get the prize and you go home with $1 million. Now let's assume you take 1 envelope, the first one, and then you are not allowed to open it. The showmaster goes behind the scenery and comes back with 1 envelope open and says, look here, there is no price in this envelope. Now in this situation, now you have 1 envelope and he has 1 envelope. You could have the price, or he could have the price in the still closed envelope. And he now asks you, would you like to exchange envelopes? I give you mine, you give me yours back, the one which you have first chosen. Usually people don't change. They stick with their first choice. Although the probability that they win the prize is only 1/3. And if they changed, the probability to win would double, go up to 2/3. However, people usually make wrong calculations. They assume that the probability, once one envelope has been opened and is empty, they assume that the winning probability is now 50-50. People are not changing because they want to appear consistent. They chose one envelope, they stay with their choice. They are consistent in their behavior. And third, they are not changing because even if the probability is higher to win if they changed, but they don't do it because they would regret having changed if they had had the price. So anticipated regret as a strong emotion prevents you from doing what is better, what augments your winning probabilities. It's called the Monty Hall dilemma, famous dilemma with mathematicians who were involved in a lot of conflicts and finding solutions for this problem. So we can assume that in financial decisions, people are not always very, very clever. It's not always easy. Like, for example, a colleague in Germany, Gerd Gigerenzer, asked people the following. He asked students and people on the street to imagine that they have taken a loan of 3,000. So they borrow from somebody 3,000. And now they need to pay back the money. And they need to pay back the money with a 12% annual interest rate. And they are not able to pay a lot back. They pay just 30 euros, 30 monetary units each month. And then Gigerenzer asked his respondents, how long does it take to pay back the loan? Now you see here what people answered. 15% assumed that they will have paid the loan in 5 years. 31% thought it will be done in 10 years. Only 26% came up with the right answer. Never. Because if you have a 12% annual interest rate to pay, it's exactly 360 per year. And 30 euros paying back each month means that you pay back 360 years. So the only thing we do is you pay back the interest rate. You pay the interest rate, but never anything from your debts. So 75% of people don't know the right answer. 70%, and even more people are inconsistent. If you ask people what they prefer, let's say they get a chocolate, which is very famous in Austria, Lindor, for 50 cents, or a chocolate with no name, no brand. If you ask people what they choose, whether they pay 50 cents for the Lindor or 20 for the no-name chocolate, then the majority goes for Lindor, according to their preferences. But and it means that they are willing to pay 30 cents more for the better chocolate. But if you offer them the no-name chocolate for free, or Lindor for 30 cents, that's the difference with the amount which they are willing to pay, as we learned in the former slide. In that case, the majority goes for the no-name chocolate. So the zero price phenomenon is something which teaches us that we are inconsistent in our choices. And the decoy effect is something which I think is quite interesting. The magazine, The Economist, which you probably know, offered in a campus, offered a subscription, annual subscription of the magazine of The Economist for $59 online. So all these students have tablets and PCs. They can read on the tablet. For $59, they get The Economist online. Or they could opt for the printed magazine, the paper version, for $125. What they observed was that 68% of the people went for the digital version, for the online version. Only 1/3 opted for the printed magazine. Now, they wanted to sell more printed magazines, and therefore they thought about marketing strategies. And there are different marketing strategies, but one is really a fascinating one because it's so cheating. They offered the magazine for $59 print version. Sorry, online version, or for $125 the print version, or, and this is the third option, $125 for print and online. What you see now is that there is a reversal of preferences. Of course, all these students know to read, and nobody took the print subscription for $125. But now, with this nonsense, well, no, absolutely not nonsense option, which is very important option which nobody chooses, you teach people what they want. They want to get a profit, a profitable option. And you see now 84% opt for the print version and online, and only 16% go for the online version. So what is the conclusion? Well, my conclusion would be we are really not very rational in all our financial decisions. Although we like usually more money better than less money, we are not able to optimize our decisions such that we get the better. Our financial literacy is kind of poor. Our financial literacy should be improved at school, in courses, etc. We are not really great economists. We are not really great financial decision makers. Now, when talking about financial literacy, there is one name which has become famous, Anna Lusardi. Lusardi has developed a very, very simple instrument to measure financial literacy. She asks people about compound interest, about real rates of return, and about risk diversification. She has 3 questions to people. Usually, she asks, suppose you had $100 in a savings account and the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much do you think you would have in your account if you left the money to grow? More than 102, exactly 102, less than 102. Not exactly difficult question. Inflation. Imagine that the interest on your savings account was 1% per year and inflation was 2% per year. After 1 year, would you be able to buy more than today, or the same, or less? That was the answer, the question with this answer options. And then, do you think that the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. Well, and she now asked people about these questions, and what she finds is that by far financial literacy, if you can measure it this way, I mean, this is very simple, but she sees a lot, really a high percentage of people don't give correct answers on all three items. And moreover, there are huge differences between countries. There are huge differences, and we could really do more to invest in education of financial issues generally, and the mathematical part particularly. So financial literacy is poor, our knowledge is poor, and our statistical capacities, calculations with probabilities are difficult. But if you take decisions under uncertainty, you usually have to do with probabilities, with likelihoods. And that's something we are not used to in general. I'm not talking that university students wouldn't be used to do statistics, but usually people have difficulties doing calculations. And this is a problem indeed in financial decision making, because if you consider that in most countries, the majority, the huge part of the income, of the money, of the financial resources is in the private households and is managed by the private households. So financial literacy is not great. And in decision making, we know that not only this perception and calculations of information, of statistics and probabilities, exponential growth, etc., not only that makes us problems, but problems derive also from shortcuts which we take in decision making. We often rely on a certain signal in a decision situation, and we conclude that the phenomenon is such or such. We use heuristics. We use abbreviations in decision-making processes. And these heuristics are sometimes good, but sometimes really misleading, and often used, for example, in marketing. In marketing, we know that the baker usually uses the loudest paper to pack the sandwiches. Why that? Because the noise of the paper gives you the impression that the bread is fresh. And when you hear the paper, you also taste that the bread is fresher than when the paper doesn't give any noise. We know that, for example, margarine is a really white product, clear white product. But usually customers claim that margarine, if you sell it as it is not really creamy. So you put some color in it, brownish, beige, and soon they have the impression that it's more creamy. Another example for signals in decision making are price and quality. Usually we assume that the higher the price of a product, the higher the quality. There's this price quality illusion. But if you look at studies which started in the 1950s, considering expert evaluations of different products, different kinds of similar products, and the correlation with the price, you observe that there is only a very small positive correlation between price and product. We did a study which, with the results which you see here, it's a jungle of relationships between price and product. No clear picture. It's a very nice picture for my taste, but it's not clear what it means. It actually means that about 10% of the quality of a product is explained by the price. So a higher price usually gives you a better product, but the correlation is rather small. Rather small. A small percentage of variance is explained. All right. On the financial market, you see that most of the biases, most of the errors which we observe in financial decision making in the private household, we observe that most of the traps into which we fall when we listen to marketing strategies. You see that all these very human shortcomings are also present on the financial market. Montier collected all different kinds of biases, of shortcomings, of abbreviations, social effects, which are observable on the stock market. And he would say that there are a lot of limits of learning, self-deception in our decision making. There are a lot of heuristics which might mislead us, and there are social effects which are important. He would say that we are usually, despite our shortcomings, despite our limits, very optimistic. We are over-optimistic. We often have the illusion to be able to control a situation, even if it's already in a very bad shape. We are overconfident. We rely, or we consider often more what we would regret rather than which option leads us to the best outcome. And we are fall prey to the hindsight bias. In retrospect, we see a decision process differently than it was. In the category of heuristics, he talks about emotions like fear, greed, which are important, but also about all the different kinds of heuristics which Kahneman and Tversky investigated and described, heuristics which were described by other scholars, and framing effects. It makes a difference psychologically if you sell a bottle half full of water or a bottle half empty of water. Objectively, in statistical terms, it doesn't make a difference, but in psychological terms, it makes a difference. And third, he has this category of social effects on the stock market, where he talks about the famous herding behavior, contagion, cascading influences. You see a lot of people doing something and you think it's the right way, you follow the mass, you follow the herd, which is not always, of course, the best. And indeed, when he asked traders, experts in the field, to give him some idea about what had led them in their decisions to very favorable outcomes, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to tell him what situational, personal considerations had led to negative outcomes. He got a lot of answers. He said, well, there was a new situation, I relied on others' advices, or my emotions played a role. I had bad luck or good luck. My knowledge was important, good or bad teamwork, analytical thinking, etc., etc. So they give a lot of reasons for the outcome of their decisions. But what you see here is brown and blue lines indicate bad outcomes and positive outcomes, there is not much difference. So we don't know what leads to a good decision, or they don't know what leads to a good outcome or what to a bad outcome. There is not much differentiation in the reasons, in the attributions which they give. But nonetheless, we are very optimistic. We are very proud of us. We are very overconfident, and we have the feeling that if something is going wrong, we are able to control it. For example, I observe here in Austria that with a pandemic, people agree that indeed one should keep a physical distance. One should do this and should do this, that. So the measures are reasonable. But I can go out, I can meet my friends and we can have a party because I can control the situation. Yeah? There's this illusion of control which is quite widespread. And overconfidence and over-optimism. I was again struck by a study by Thomas Oberlechner, who asked currency traders on a scale from 1 to 7 to indicate whether they are equally good as others in their job, or better, or less good, less efficient. And what he found was on this 1 to 7 point scale that the average was 5.06. So was tending towards I am better than the others. And he found that almost 3/4 of the traders saw themselves as more successful than the other traders. Only 4.5% of traders saw themselves as less successful. And that means that when you look at 15 currency traders, about 14 would consider them better than the average. So we are better than average. People feel they are better than average. In Norway, 75% of car drivers think they are driving better than average. So I started talking about rationality, about utility maximization. I gave you some very simple examples, multiplying 10 by 10. We saw we are really good because our willpower can let the train go to the right or to the left. But then I started saying something about psychology, about shortcomings, about traps into which we fall, about abbreviations in decision making. And that was the negative news. The positive news is we still think we are very good. We are very good decision makers. Problem is, however, that might mislead us to learn from our failures, from our mistakes. Now, economic psychology, social psychology, behavioral economics, all these behavioral disciplines have in the past decades, not very long time, but past decades, really accumulated a lot of insights which show us that in our behavior, we are not always fulfilling the basic assumptions, the axioms of rationality theory. There are a lot of insights which show us what people do and why they do certain things and not others. And I'm sure many of you know about the use of this knowledge in the political arena. I'm sure many of you know about nudging. Nudging means that you take stock of the knowledge in the behavioral sciences when you regulate people's behavior. You nudge them, you push them in a certain direction, knowing that people are not always able to correctly calculate all the information, knowing that people are not always motivated to find the best solution. They're sometimes lazy, and we are sometimes short of time. We don't always have the time to consider all the possibilities. Therefore, it's useful to think about how you design a decision situation such that people with little time, little motivation, or calculation difficulties, that they still do intuitively by using system one, the gut feeling, that they do what leads for them to a better outcome, and or at least for the society to a better outcome. How can you get take advantage of all this knowledge in designing decision situations? Well, when you regulate people's behavior, when you regulate the behavior in the state or in an organization, then you can just inform people. You can communicate to people. You tell people, please wash your hands carefully, please keep physical distance, please wear masks, please don't meet too many others, etc. You can inform and communicate to people, tell them why they shouldn't do it. And perhaps they follow your advices. Or you could also prohibit certain behavior by law. You order some behaviors by law. Or you can regulate behavior by certain taxes or subsidizes. So you have a lot of instruments as a decision architect, as a responsible person in policy or in the organization. You have a lot of instruments, of tools to regulate people's behavior, to influence people's behavior. And you can use very paternalistic strategies or instruments where you tell them what to do, you command certain rules and behaviors, or you're very liberal. You're just informing people. Or you use behavioral insights and you nudge people to do what is the best for them and the society. If you use nudging, if you nudge people, you are on the side of liberal paternalistic regulation. How could we use all these insights gained in psychology? Well, I would say a very influential group of scientists who were studying all the academic papers, all the research which has been done so far, and trying to apply it in the field of policy. A very successful team or group was the Behavioral Insight team in the UK. When in 2008, I think, Richard Taylor and Cass Sunstein published their book, Nudge, David Cameron, the Prime Minister of UK, discovered this book and thought, well, that's great. We have to really study this and try to apply it in policy. And all his staff had to read, so I was told, this book over the summer, and they established a team, the BIT, the Behavioral Insight team, who from then on was very successful in applying our knowledge in the field of policy, where you design the situation as an architect and people behave according to their intuition in the right way, in the positive way. Now, in this study, in this group of scientists and practitioners, they came up with a scheme of tools which they call the EAST summary. They developed this acronym EAST from easy, attractive, social, and timely. What they are saying is that if you want people to behave in a certain way, to invest their money in a certain way, to behave in a healthy way, to eat healthy food, etc., make it easy for them to do it. Attract people's attention, catch their attention, attract it to the goal which they should pursue. Use social cues, tell them that the majority is already showing a certain desired behavior, and think about when is the best time to communicate certain strategies, certain goals. So what they say is, if you are in the situation to help people making decisions and behave in a certain way, use the toolbox EAST, and it will help. Now, I guess I don't have much time left. I will use just a couple of minutes to then finish, but I would want to give you one example out of each category. One example is easy. You probably all know that. If you look at organ donators in Europe, I have predominantly European countries here, sorry, don't know about the Russian situation. But you see here that in Denmark, in 2002, there were 4.25% of the population who were organ donators. In the Netherlands, it was 27%. In UK, 17%. In Germany, 12%. In Austria, almost everybody is an organ donator, 99.98%. The same in Belgium, France, etc. Now, why is this the case? What does this have to do with nudging, with decision making? Well, we once asked Germans and Austrians about their attitudes towards organ donation. And we found that in Germany and in Austria, the majority of people are in favor of organ donation. There's no significant difference between the Germans and the Austrians in their attitudes towards organ donation. But there is a huge difference in the percentage who are organ donators, 12 to almost 100%. Now, you know the cause for the difference. The difference is due to the fact that in Austria, if you do not want to be an organ donator, you have to opt out. You have to go to an institution and declare that you do not want to be on the list of organ donators. You are, by default, organ donator. In Germany, by default, you are not organ donator. If you want to become an organ donator, you have to go and ask to be put on the list of organ donators. Now, even if both have the same attitude towards this goal, you have this difference because attitude and behavior are different. In Germany, it's difficult. There are hindrances to become organ donators. People say, I go tomorrow to do it. I want to do it, but I have to go tomorrow. Today I don't have time. And tomorrow they don't go because they don't have time, but they will go the day after tomorrow. So they never go. In Austria, those who do not want have the effort to take. So easiness or hindrances are a topic. And you see the power of easy and of default when you look at the internet. When there is a box already crossed, most people leave it and go on. If you have to choose not to install, I don't know what, you have to, as a little effort. So make it easy, make it difficult, depending on what you want. And I go on with all the examples which I have collected for easy, and go to attractive and attention. A very powerful study was done in Denmark. In Denmark, Pelle Hansen, a professor, did an experiment with his students where they gave passengers sweets. And they were looking at how many of the people who got a small chocolate, a bonbon, whatever, they were looking at how many people brought the paper to the bin, garbage bin, or threw it just away on the street. And that was the baseline of garbage which they found. And after that, some time, they repeated this. They gave people chocolates, but they showed on the floor with these green marks where the garbage bin is. And what they observed was that 45% more litter was going into the bins. In that case, you have to attract the attention. You have to show people the way to the right option, to the right behavior. And you see there are more examples. There's also motivational effects which attract people's behavior. Do you know this? Usually people, when they have to go up stairways, they use the escalator or the how do you call it, electric stairs. So what can you do to motivate people to move? Because you know that moving is healthy. They should do some sports. Now what they did here in the fun theory, people, Volkswagen fun theory, was designing the stairways such that they look like a piano. Like a piano, how do you call it, the keyboard of the piano. And when you do this, you probably got the idea. When you do this, it's funny to move. People try and go and they even hear the noise, like playing piano themselves with their feet. So this is something where you don't, people, please do more, move more around, do more gymnastics. But you just make it fun and people do it automatically. Smart meters are very much used to tell people, to give people feedback about their energy consume. I thought this is a very great nudging possibility. You see how dark South America becomes when you use too much resources. So You don't need to prohibit, to work with laws always. Sometimes you need to, but sometimes you just direct the attention of people towards something, and you will see that they are able to do the better for themselves. All right, let me go on a little bit. Social norms. We all know that social norms are very important, and social norms are something which are usually influencing or having impact on people's behavior much more than advices by politicians or even by the law. You do what the others are doing. You follow the crowd. That's a very powerful signal to know what to do. And we all know that you should look for the right moment to teach people to do something, to regulate their behavior. There are sometimes imprinting moments. And we know that losses loom much larger than gains. We try to avoid losses. You see here the results of a study which I found quite fascinating. They did a study in a pizzeria, and in this pizzeria, they sold a pizza which was just basic. Some flour with tomatoes and cheese. That's it. Unless you want more. You get bacon, you get more cheese, you get chili, you get, I don't know. You can build up. And in that case, in Italy and in the US, they sold pizzas on average for $3, plus minus. In the other experimental condition, in the other pizzeria, they sold the pizza with everything on top. There's everything there. You get a pizza, huge one. Unless you don't want bacon or you don't want vegetable or this or that or cheese, they can scale down. And you see here, they spent about twice as much than in the first condition. This teaches us that in the situation where you start with the basics, you build up, you gain more. You're in the gain situation. But if you could have everything and you renounce on some ingredients, by renouncing, you're in a loss situation. We don't want to lose. Therefore, they spend more, they eat more here than in the first condition. If you want people to be a bit more controlled, help them to control themselves. Now, coming to the end, I would like to say that nudging has become a really important industry, but it's also heavily criticized. Some say it's persuasion, it's manipulation, and therefore be aware, when you nudge people, when you use these behavioral insights in designing decision situations, in helping making better decisions, be sure that you're very transparent, very open to how you manipulate, how you design the situation, and why. Make sure that the opposite than the desired behavior is also possible. If somebody wants the whole pizza, he or she should get it all. You don't prohibit anything. And be sure that the goal of nudging is to the benefit of the individual, to the nudged one, and the society. That's quite important criteria if you want to nudge in an ethical way. And I would like to conclude by thanking you and by telling you, if you advise, if you help people, do it properly. Thank you very much.
Эрик, большое спасибо. Thank you very much. Very interesting and useful.
Thank you. If you have any questions, let me know.
Можно вопрос, да? Это вот у меня какой вопрос к профессору. С его точки зрения, вот австрийские власти, они при принятии каких-то решений на уровне государства прислушиваются к опыту и данным психологов вот в области поведения? И если да, то какие примеры он мог бы нам привести?
Sorry, can you, I didn't know that I have to switch to English. Sorry, I just switched at this moment. I'm asking the translator, can you briefly say what the question is?
Сейчас можно уже, да? Вопрос у меня такой. Ну, во-первых, спасибо большое за очень интересное выступление, поскольку мне кажется, что то, что сегодня говорилось, применимо к разным областям, не только к экономическому поведению, но и к здоровью. Это очень интересно. Вопрос у меня был такой. С точки зрения профессора, как он считает, австрийские власти при принятии каких-то и внедрении государственных решений или стратегий изменения поведения прислушиваются к психологам и к данным ученых? И если да, то не мог бы он привести какой-то пример? Потому что, к сожалению, в России с этим у нас сложно.
Yes. Yeah, well, it depends, I would say. The situation is such that even in Austria, psychology is not heard much by politicians. But in the ministries, there are more and more people who are aware that behavioral sciences are important, and they are telling them relevant things, which help them developing good strategies and operationalize operations when they want to do something. So the politicians, I would say, those on the top level are not listening much. But but more and more people say it's important, and more people tell the politicians that it's important. So, for example, today we delivered a paper on corona measurements and vaccination to the government, in which we say that if you want people to go to the vaccination or to tests, you have to communicate it in a way so that people can trust you. Second, you have to communicate that the measures which you are proposing are effective. And third, when you are able to change people's attitude or to influence people, you have to make sure that the right or the desired behavior is easy. So you use all what we know about trust and credibility, and you use all about what you know about situational decision architecture, nudging. I cannot tell you whether the politicians will read it or not. But when I go to the Ministry of Finance, there I have people who are very much believing in psychology. However, also in our country, there are many psychologists saying politicians are not listening to us. Okay, but before blaming the politicians for not listening to us, we have to ask ourselves why they don't listen to us. It's not because they think we are stupid or we don't have anything to tell them. It's because they don't understand it. So we have to find the way to communicate with them. It's our duty. Blaming them would not change the situation.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо.
Thank you for the question.
We've got a question from the YouTube.
Эрик,
If you don't mind.
могу я задать вопрос, да?
Sure.
Эрик, вот русские люди сейчас, наверное, не очень доверчивы, потому что были очень доверчивы в 90-е и пережили много манипулятивных приемов, и память историческая еще сильна. И действительно, наверное, надо через обучение и воспитание показывать, что есть позитивные, как подталкивание технологии, и негативные, например, как окна Овертона, когда пытаются поменять культуру, перевернуть традиции совсем. И вот как вы думаете, здесь действительно воспитание и образование основной канал или что-то еще?
Well, of course, when you talk about education, we really have to make sure that education is on a high standard. That's the best investment in the country, I think. And that's the best guarantee that we have later psychologists who are really doing a clever job. And my experience, that's my personal experience, is that we should collaborate with on an interdisciplinary level. If we want to have influence on the political level or the societal level, we have to become more interdisciplinary. That's really difficult because you have to learn other languages, like the language of the economist or the lawyer, etc. That's tedious, that's hard, but we have to do this step. Because the problems with which we have to deal in society and in politics, everywhere, in organizations as well, none of the problems comes and says, hey, I'm a psychological problem or I'm an economic problem. All these problems need to be settled by different disciplines. So we have to combine the knowledge with others, which is not easy, which means taking an effort.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Еще вопросы? Да, вот Екатерина Щенкова хотела задать на английском, да?
So I would like
Go on.
Yes. Grüß Gott aus Belgrad nach Wien zunächst mal.
Guten Abend, Gordana, freut mich.
Thank you. Ja, also ich würde lieber auf Deutsch sprechen, aber ich verstehe, dass das nicht angebracht ist in dieser Situation. I just greeted our professor in German, so I don't know much about the topic you dealt with, so I'm grateful for new knowledge I got. Nevertheless, it seems to me that decision making in humans is even more complicated. So I'm not sure that such criteria as East, for example, would be enough in decisions which are related, you know, not to trade and financing, but to some, you know, human issues.
Yeah.
And I think these kind of decisions are most important to people. Just one example, if you allow me, concerning the pandemic. I'm getting almost every day some articles from my German colleagues, including psychologists. They are almost with no exception very critical about all the measures. And we could see also on TV big demonstrations in many German cities. So how would you explain that? I mean, I understand there is some historical background. You know, the Germans are very concerned about, you know, Grundgesetz. I mean, the German constitution and possible violation of the constitution rights provided by, guaranteed by constitution. But
you're frozen now.
Question not educate me.
Okay, Gordana, thank you very much for this question. And your image is frozen now and I can't hear you, so I try to answer for what I have understood so far. Indeed, nudging is not the solution for everything. Definitely not. At the beginning of the pandemic in March, I was asked by a journalist about whether nudging would be the right approach now to help people to behave in the right way. And I said, no, not at all. In my opinion, not at all. In this situation, you have to tell people exactly what they need to do, why they need to do it, and you have to control the behavior and punish them if they are not doing it. There is no way to bargain, to let the opposite happen as well. So you have to be clear. But now I would say that nudging could offer you many things, many tools which could be applied. For example, we have these mass tests in Austria these days. So think about, first of all, to make it practical to people. If in Vienna, for example, you have only 3 places where you need to go, many people would not go because it's too distant and because they think, well, if there are other 50,000 today who drive with a public transport, I get an infection just by going there. Yeah, so that would be a simple idea of have more possibilities rather than 3, even if they are huge. It's not gonna work. Or make it attractive. Show the people the profit which they get. You know what our politicians told us? They said, go and have you tested, because our goal is to fish, they use this word, to fish those who are infected and to isolate them. And second, if you are negative, if you're tested negative, you should not be too sure. You have to still protect yourself and keep physical distance, etc., etc. So they tell you 2 disadvantages if you go being tested, rather than saying what is positive for you and for the society. Yeah. So you see, I'm not saying that nudging is everything, but there are so many mistakes which they make in communicating their strategies and in facilitating the behavior. There are so many stupid mistakes which happen by not considering the effect of this knowledge. Now, when you refer though to the protests in Berlin, for example, to the corona deniers, etc. This is a huge issue, a huge topic, I'm sure. Of course, you cannot convince them by simple nudges. I think this is a problem which is far more complex. Our inability, our increasing inability to communicate with those who have the opposite opinion is a problem which we have not yet studied and no tool or strategy to solve. Listen, my opinion is that we are living that in the past, we at least had the same information from which we started. And then we have different interpretations and different preferences in society. Yeah, but at least there was the same basic information. Now it seems like some are living in one world, the others are living in a completely different world, and they get information which is selected and confirming their opinions and stereotypes. If we communicate with those denying corona, you tell them something and they just don't understand how you can believe it, because their information pool is completely selected and different. In that case, you won't solve the problem by easy, attractive, or timely. But this is a huge, I think, a huge social, psychological, but also societal and political topic.
If I may add just a sentence, I mean, the problem is even more complicated, because among those who question measures, who question tests, who question effectiveness of wearing masks, I mean, educated and competent people. I mean, scientists and physicians. I mean, they are not ignorant.
No.
And they refer, I mean, to as it is called, evidences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We all know the example of Sweden. I mean, people don't wear masks in Sweden, even nowadays. I heard recently from somebody living there.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Of course, we all have chance to get information from that. I mean, it's nothing secret, it's nothing, esoteric.
Yeah, but the basic knowledge difference, and some are closing themselves into their bubble and the others in the other bubble. And I think this is a major problem to overcome. But definitely, nudging helps to regulate people's behavior, and I think it's interesting because it's less paternalistic than law. And if you don't need a law, you should not establish a law. You facilitate certain behavior, but with regard to superstition, representations of the world, of the virus, etc., I think we are opening a completely new and even much, much more complex topic. What my experience is that nudging helps in environmental issues very much. Environmental, energy saving, health behavior. In that cases, you can do a lot, but it's definitely not all. But thank you. I see here in the chat one question, which is in German. Thank you very much, Michael. Wie Vertrauen sich auf die kulturellen Dimensionen von Hofstede bezieht. Okay, you're referring to trust and the Hofstede dimensions. Well, I don't know. First of all, Hofstede, I think, was doing his dimensions in the 80s. So it's almost half a century which has passed by since he collected data. And I'm not sure whether these dimensions still hold. Of course, we love them and we don't get rid of what we love, even if it's outdated. Yeah, but I cannot say much about the Hofstede dimensions, but definitely, you know why. Austria is a country which on the Hofstede dimensions is very high on believing in status, believing in, I don't know how it's called in English, believing in the authorities. But believing is not necessarily trusting. It's just you look at what they are saying, you behave according to their commands. You know, in Austria there was the emperor for a long time. You had the Tsar. It makes a difference to Switzerland, for example. But that is not trust. Just obeying, being disciplined is not being convinced. And if you look at the other dimension,
power distance, дистанция власти. То есть это не соответствует доверию.
Yeah, power distance. Yeah, the other dimension. I don't know whether that relates very much on trust, but I must say I'm not familiar with recent studies by Hofstede's dimensions and trust measures in the authorities. And in our tax studies, where we studied trust very much, we did never consider the Hofstede dimensions, although we were looking at different countries. So I cannot answer your question properly to Hofstede. I would speculate. But what I can tell you, when you refer to countries and trust, in the field of taxation, we found that in some countries, people tell us that they cannot trust the authorities. And if there were measures into trust building, they would be more compliant. In other countries, people said if the authorities were more controlling and fining non-compliant behavior, they would pay more. And the interesting fact was that in Germany, for example, or in most European countries, people said the authorities need to wield more power, control and punishment. In India, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, they said the authorities need to invest more in trust, and then we are cooperating. Yeah, then we are cooperating. So that was interesting, where trust is a basis for some behavior, rather than the behavior, so to say, a cause for trust. That's why I'm saying probably we never studied the Hofstede dimensions, because our thinking goes the other way around. Trust develops with the behavior of the authorities.
Vielen Dank.
Bitte schön, vielen Dank Ihnen.
Thank you very much.
Danke. All right, I think I can't see any other question in the chat.
Поднимают руку люди. Если еще не устал, Эрик, может быть, еще на пару вопросов можно ответить?
Да, меня подключили, да, спасибо. Я бы хотела задать такой вопрос. Всегда ли нужно рационализировать принятие решений? Я имею в виду, что мера достаточности информации, например, или понимание ситуации на рациональном уровне, каким должно быть для того, чтобы решение было ну, эффективным или дало такие результаты, которые ожидаются? Это один вопрос. И другой вопрос, используете ли вы в своих исследованиях оценку иррациональных способов принятия решений, ну, например, интуиции? И насколько это полезно для принятия решения, опираться на интуитивное знание или иррациональные формы принятия решений? Спасибо.
Thank you very much for your questions. Yeah, first of all, I think that both the intuitive processing of information has no disadvantage regarding the analytical system. So Kahneman distinguishes between system 1 and system 2 decisions, the intuitive one versus the analytical one, the reasoning, etc., etc. Both are good, and both have shown in the development of humanity that they are efficient. But sometimes they are misleading. The analytical system are leading to wrong answers, but also the intuitive one. Therefore, regarding your first question, do we always have to reason? I would say no. If it's not an important decision, don't worry. If you see that the sky is cloudy and you consider taking the umbrella, not taking the umbrella, taking the umbrella, just do what comes into your mind. If the decision is an important one, then consider analytically what it means if you choose option 1 or option 2. And once you have considered it analytically, try to feel it, to feel the decision. And if there is a difference, if there is inconsistency, go back and look for pros and cons in case of important decisions. That would be my advice. But I'm definitely not saying that intuitive decisions are worse than analytical ones. To the opposite. If you look at the School of Gigerenzer at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, they are studying heuristics like Kahneman and Tversky, and they come up with many examples where they show that too much knowledge, too much reasoning can be misleading. The intuitive answer can be the right one, and very often is the right one.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Наверное, Эриха нужно уже отпускать, у него завтра много выступлений, но пришли еще вопросы на чат. Может быть, на сайте можно ответить как-то на те вопросы, которые в чате. Как вы думаете?
Yeah, I tried to read. Yeah, we have to use selective perception. Yes, I'm sure. We have to be selective in our information selection, but sometimes look a little bit back. Sometimes consider something twice and see whether you have overlooked something. That would be my advice. Sleep over a decision, and perhaps the next day you see something different. And when you have to select, look at what you selected, how you selected it, and who selected the information for you. Think about the picture where I showed you the two people who are fighting with each other. If you only look at the selective spot selected by the media, by the TV in that case, you might come to the wrong solution. But I'm definitely sure you have to select information. And we know in marketing, advertisement, for example, 95% of the information is lost. About 2 to 5% of information is received by the recipient. So there is a lot of selection. But sometimes the whole processing of information is directed in a persuasive way so that you should come to a conclusion which is not the right one. And you see that when you get all these bubbles, when you're living in these bubbles, when you're living in a certain bubble in the social media, you get exactly the information which confirms your opinion. I mean, that can't be the solution. Otherwise, we create different worlds which cannot live next to each other. Okay, the next one was in 2020, Edelman Trust Barometer reveals that despite a strong global economy and near full employment, none of the four societal institutions that the study measures, government, business, and joint media, is trusted. The cause of this paradox can be found in people's fears about the future and their role in it, which are a wake-up call for our institutions to embrace a new way of effectively building trust, balancing competence and ethical behavior. Completely agree, Irina. I'm completely agreeing with this statement. The trust in the institutions is paramount. It's eroding, and we have to think about what's going on in society, that people are simply not trusting anymore in politicians, but even in physicians, in the academia, in the so-called experts. So the institutional trust is important if you want people to follow certain suggestions which are probably intelligent and wise. Thank you.
Эрик, вам здоровья, здоровья, творчества. И надеюсь на будущую кооперацию. Может быть, мы какой-нибудь мега-грант придумаем.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the same to you, to all of you. Stay healthy. Hope to see you one day live and not only on the screen. Have a good day, afternoon, no, evening, night now in Russia. And if you pursue the conference tomorrow, do you still have another day tomorrow? Okay, otherwise, all the best to you and thanks for having me.
Vielen herzlichen Dank und schöne Grüße an Wien.
Dankeschön.
Ich vermisse es sehr.
Ja, nach Belgrad auch oder